Hi, welcome to a new episode of Engineering Rebuilt.
Do you think you know a lot about construction?
Maybe we can provide a fresh perspective.
This is a podcast where we rebuild preconceptions of engineering,
Reclaim the narrative,
and share the voices of women from across the construction industry. Why not join us?
Let's get started.
Hello, and welcome to our latest episode of the Engineering Rebuilt podcast. I'm your host, Tina Gunnarsson, together with Yvonne Raleigh, and today we're joined by Lisa Sawyer. So Lisa, welcome to our podcast.
Oh, hello.
Would you like to start by introducing yourself to our audience?
Thank you, Tina. Thank you, Yvonne, for inviting me to take part in this. It's quite exciting. I've done anything like this before. My name's Lisa Sawyer. I'm a director of civil engineering at a company called Land Studio. We're based in Chester. I've worked for big consulting engineers and contractors before, but this is a new role for me. I've only been here nearly 3 months now, so it's exciting and different, and hopefully throughout this you might find out a bit more about that.
It certainly sounds amazing.
That sounds amazing. Yeah, welcome to the podcast. Should we start by just going through how you got from civil engineer through to director?
Where I went to university in Bradford. I did a degree in civil and structural engineering. I didn't do too well actually at school, and I was told by a number of people at that point that I wouldn't become an engineer because I wasn't particularly good at maths. But I was determined that I wanted to do something practical, and Bradford at the time had a foundation year in engineering, so it effectively covered A-level maths, but also other sciences and other types of engineering. So I thought I'd go and do that anyway, even though I failed my A-level maths. And I got a distinction and enjoyed it and loved it, and the environment was different, and I really enjoyed the civil engineering aspects of that. So then went on to the degree course there. And that degree course had a year out in the middle of it where you could go and work for a year, which was the best thing I ever did, because I actually got to the end of the second year at university and thought, this really isn't for me. It's too mathematical. And maybe those guys were right who said it to me many times before. But I got a job on site in London with Molum and on the Jubilee Line extension, and I absolutely had an amazing time. I was one female in about 200 men, a 20-year-old, never been to London really because I'm from Chester, don't go down south very often. And I thought, this is amazing. This is what I wanted to do. This is why I wanted to become an engineer. It wasn't because of the maths. It was because I wanted to do something that was really practical. And I put my heart and soul into that year. I worked probably much longer hours than I do now. And I went from working on the Jubilee Line to also building a bridge at the end of City Airport, which was another reason why I wanted to become an engineer, because I'd seen at a careers fair at school that these guys were showing this wonderful bridge. And I thought, I'm going to build a bridge. And Yvonne, I've heard one of the other podcasts that says something similar to you.
I designed that bridge.
The Steve Redgrave bridge.
Yeah, that was yeah. I got my chartered status for the contractor designed alternative on part of that bridge.
Great. Well, I was a setting out engineer.
Oh, how cool is that?
And I loved it. And then I worked there. I was supposed to be there for 12 months in total. I ended up staying nearly 18 months with the holidays either side. and went back to university with a new invigoration of, I want to become an engineer. This is definitely what I want to do. So from there, I carried on working for Morlums when I left university because they gave me a job. So I went back to university. They gave me a job for when I finished my degree, which I did, and I got a 2-1. So I was really pleased with myself. And went back to work for Morlums back in London again on a number of projects for a few years, and then thought, actually, I want to settle down at some point, and I want to have kids. And at that point in time, I worked for the National Civils Division, which meant that you could actually be moved around anywhere around the country. There wasn't really any opportunity, I guess, to talk about the fact that I was female and I would want to settle down and have a family. And this whole contracting work didn't really work with that. It didn't seem to fit. It's different now, I know. I hope it's different now, I know. But it just didn't fit. And I also wanted to get chartered. So I thought, well, actually, at that time, you needed to do a year in the opposite. So if you worked for a contractor, you had to go and get some experience as a consultant and vice versa. So I applied for jobs back in the north and got a job for Arup. I had a small office in Wrexham. So I'm from Chester originally. There was never an intention to come back, but they offered me this role at the Wrexham office of Arup, and I took it, and I've never actually gone back. In terms of, I didn't go back to work for a contractor. I do miss it. I do think that it's great experience, and that you can't really be a good designer without having some of that practical knowledge. So I think it's a shame that the industry doesn't have this requirement if you're going to get chartered to do both, because you can quite easily become a chartered engineer without ever setting foot on a building site. And so I stayed in the consulting world and settled down and had a family. I've now got a 10-year-old daughter, and I worked for a number of different large corporate consulting firms throughout, doing different things, but one of them working in the buildings environment, so working with structural engineers and designing the civil engineering aspects of that was much more interesting to me than the actual structural engineer, because structural engineers at the time did both structural and civil engineering. So I then set up a team with, I worked at Gifford at this time, I set up a team of purely drainage engineers really at the time, to take it out of the structural engineering role and to show that it's actually a discipline in its own right. And that continued through working at Gifford, which then became Ramboll, and stayed there for 18 years. And that wasn't a plan either. But I worked around different departments. I worked my way up, and I tried to change that perception of the civil engineering for a buildings project just being an add-on to the structural engineering role. And during that time, I could see that that was happening on the landscape and architectural side too. However, the landscape architects seem to manage to be able to come out as a discipline in their own right in the last 5 years, maybe a bit longer, whereas it never was the case from a civil engineering point of view. And that really frustrated me. And I was getting more and more frustrated and more downbeat in terms of my role on a day-to-day basis. So I would deliver what I thought was really good work, but never really felt like you were properly part of that team or taken seriously, that it was important as the structural engineer was or as the architect was. So today I work for a landscape architect firm, but as an engineer, to bring together those two roles to show that actually the holistic design of civil engineering and landscape architecture outside the building can be a discipline in its own right, and actually is really important, because we've all seen in the last couple of years that people living in really nice places or working in really nice places and spending time around their offices or their houses is really important. And that, alongside climate change, seemed to be a good fit to me, and it didn't feel right that it's still stuck after 25 years of being in the business, still stuck in with the structural engineer as an add-on. So that's where I am today.
So you were working, I mean, you worked in Molam at the same time as me, and you did all of that interesting stuff. You were working on the opposite sites to me. So because I decided to do my design placement in the Molam's in-house temporary works department. So, and I got wrapped into the A2M2 Medway Crossing and Docklands Light Railway, but JLE, while you were doing JLE, I was up in Birmingham and Spaghetti Junction. So, I mean, I never saw another woman when I worked for Molam. I mean, literally the whole of Molam career was just me. And lots of men on site. And you were doing the same on other sites. It's fascinating, isn't it?
Yeah, that's quite funny. It is, yeah. It's the whole. I never actually noticed being a woman in the industry as being an issue at all throughout my early career. I thought it was great. I actually used it probably to my advantage, and but I didn't actually see anything different. I didn't see I was different, and I've actually had some really good experiences. I've heard a lot of stories from other people about not so good experiences, but I've actually personally had some really great experiences and haven't been affected by the fact of my gender's different.
Well, that's a good thing.
It's really brilliant, actually. It's really brilliant to hear that you've not found it an issue and that you've generally had a really positive experience, because I think that's quite rare, actually, just given the people we've talked on the podcast and the conversations we've had. And it shines through the way you tell your career story. You're so excited and you're so energetic and positive about your career. And it's so great to see someone who's so far into their career who's still really, really excited and positive and optimistic. So I think that's absolutely brilliant.
It's really important to me to be passionate about what you do. And only today we've got a work experience student with us from school, so the 15-year-old, and talking to them about you need to be really passionate about what you do and why you do it, because this is your life, and you spend most of your time at work, so you've got to really enjoy it.
Absolutely. And that passion is so much more important than, say, being great at maths. Like you demonstrate just by being. You don't have to be. Actually, I'm curious. So I was very good at maths, and it was probably one of the reasons I went into engineering, although sustainability was my driver. You've shared that you weren't great at maths, but you've got a passion for engineering. What about you, Yvonne?
So I had a passion for science and a place to do medicine. And then my dad died during my A-levels. So I kind of flunked. No, I didn't kind of flunk. I totally flunked my A-levels. Let's be realistic. And so I didn't get my place doing medicine. And I stuck a pin in the paper and it said civil engineering at Cranfield University. And I went, well, what the hell's civil engineering? And where the hell is Cranfield? And I phoned them up and they said, oh, it's actually the Royal Military College of Science at Shrivenham. You can have an interview tomorrow if you like. If you pass the interview, then you can have a place. And so, yeah, I mean, Jeff Mays was the head of civil engineering at RMCS when I went and interviewed. And fortunately, I mean, he put an A-level maths paper in front of me and said, if you can sit this, if you pass it, then you're in, basically. And I sat the maths paper and I got a B. And he went, yeah, okay, that's good enough for us. We'll let you back in. And the rest of they say is history. I mean, we did explosives engineering and all sorts of stuff. And it was just really, the degree course was so interesting that by the time I'd done the degree course, I couldn't think about doing anything other than engineering. And yeah, I mean, I ended up on the M25 setting out white lines for 8 months. Yeah, it's not, I mean, it kind of damped it, but you know, you rise again.
So it sounds like we've come from like just three really vastly different backgrounds, vastly different skill levels. By some incredible, I don't know, coincidence, you both worked around the same time together, but not together. How do we get people like your 10-year-old daughter, like, how do we communicate it better that you don't have to be great at maths? There's actually loads of entry routes in.
It's important for me to spread that word through schools and through, we get people into the business, all the businesses I've worked for, through work experience, and showing them that people who don't pass necessarily exams because I failed my A-level maths. So just passing exams isn't the be-all and end-all, and you can get to where you've got to if you've got that passion and drive to make it work. Because I just wanted a career that was I wanted a practical career. I wanted something that I could do lots of different things, and that's where my passion for travel was. One thing that I didn't ever do was go and work abroad, but I did a lot of travel through work, and I love traveling outside of work. So it was one of the reasons why somebody had said engineers travel a lot. So I was like, I love traveling. Let's go and be an engineer. So it was never about the education side of it. I knew that was important and that I needed some education to get a career, whether that was however long it takes to do that, because there's various ways to do that now. And it's that sort of promotion that I like to say, is that there isn't just one route anymore. I think that was probably the only route when I went to university, was you must stay at school, you must do your A-levels, you must go to university and do a degree. And no one ever talked about any other route. So it's important to get that message out there that there are many different ways to do it.
Agree. And I think they're getting better at getting that message across, especially through apprenticeships and through experienced ways of getting chartership. I want to dip back into your travel comment. Where did it take you?
I've done a lot of work with the MOD. So I've been out to Gibraltar, I've been to Cyprus, we've done jobs in Nepal, and we've got, as most of the big consultants have these days, an office in India. So I've been out to India 5 times to build up a team there to help support me. And whilst there's difficult decisions on whether that's a good thing or a bad thing for the UK and the industry, I think it was really important to have that diversity within the design team. So I used going out to India as a way to make sure that it worked for the good in the UK, and it wasn't just an offshoring where you send your work to get it done for cheaper.
Can I ask a little bit more about your more recent position?
So I work for a company called Land Studio. They're a small landscape architect who look at the design holistically through the landscape design and the drainage mainly, although the wider civils is involved in that, but look at it as a one discipline. So we look at placemaking, master planning, and how things work together with the landscape, and not just design a landscape over here, design the drainage to fit the landscape. The drainage design is part of the landscape design. And we know that there aren't many companies in the UK that do that on the sort of scale that we're doing it, in terms of small business. There are some of the big consultants themselves have virtually all disciplines in those big consultants, but whether they work together, because I never really saw that as happening in the bigger consultants I worked for. But I see that there needs to be a change in the way that maybe these projects are procured, or consultants are procured on projects. So bringing the landscape and the drainage mainly together specifically on building projects can be a discipline. We haven't got a name for it. We should maybe call it something in its own right.
Yeah, you've got 5 minutes to invent a name, and we'll christen it here on the podcast. But you're absolutely right, because the fact that we don't think about the drainage as part of the landscape and as part of the overall design, and we don't tie them together, has led to so many issues. I mean, you look at so many different residential developments, commercial developments, where the water management and how that works has a fundamental impact. I was talking to one of my colleagues 2 or 3 weeks ago And he's bought a new build house, and their drainage, it means that their garden is flooding to the edge of their patio every single week. And he's going, I'm sorry, but the drainage design clearly isn't adequate. And the response is, well, it's designed for a 1 in 100 year flood. Well, clearly it isn't, because otherwise it wouldn't be sat at the bottom of my patio, guys. And I think a lot of developers have put drainage at the bottom of the list. It's like, it's a tick box exercise. Have we put a drain in? Yes, we put a drain in. But does it actually work within the landscape that they've designed? Absolutely not. And that's why it needs to be tied together.
Yeah, and we see that the drainage and the levels on the site fundamentally set then the landscape for the site. So that on a housing development, you do that before you've placed your houses on that site and decided on where they're going to be. So it's just trying to change the mindset of the people who are procuring, the developers or the clients who are procuring those services. That it isn't just we'll go to that company for a drainage engineer, we'll go to that company for a landscape architect, or bring in the drainage engineer when everything's been set. There's the plan of the site, now do me a drainage scheme, because you're never going to get a system that then works holistically, or you'll get the issues that you've friends had.
Well, Yvonne mentioned this 1 in 100 year flood, right? And that's something that's going to happen more frequently. Yeah, how do you incorporate that into your designs?
So part of the landscape design should be to allow for exceedance flows events, areas that are allowed to flood that are not in people's back gardens. So the landscape is designed so that those areas can flood over and above that 1 in 100 year event, or water is taken off the site or around the site in such a way that they just don't affect people's properties. Because there's nothing wrong with having water sitting on your site if it's managed in the right way.
In fact, it's quite nice. Water in the right places is all good. We're quite keen on water in the right places. Certainly in the southeast, it's becoming drier and drier. So having spaces for water is a good thing.
And that's the other side of it. So everyone talks about flooding, but actually water in very dry areas, you want to collect that water and keep it on your site and reuse it, because we don't want to irrigate using potable water. We want to use the water that falls on the land and kept on the land where it's falling.
Can I ask some questions around how you went from, whichever level of engineer you were, into a director role, and if you've got any advice for people who are looking to progress their careers?
I became a director at Ramboll, the last big consultant engineer that I worked at, through running of a team. So there's this perception that you can only get up in the world when you go and win work. And I was not a work winner in that specific team. So I struggled actually to become a director because I wasn't bringing in clients to the business. But Ramboll saw that there was a need also for people management and keeping people within a team, keeping people happy, making that team work effectively actually was just as important as bringing in work and winning work and making sure that we can deliver work. Because if people are happy, they deliver work better and more effectively. And so that's how I became a director, because I basically pushed the business and said, just because I don't bring in work doesn't mean that I shouldn't be promoted for it. And I run a team of 30 people and I'm not a director. And after that, I did.
And did you, I guess, inspire everyone else in that team of 30 to be as enthusiastic and as happy as you? Yeah, leading by example. I love that.
It is one of my, I guess one of my key goals is that even if people think I'm not a particularly good engineer, or have done in the past, that I will inspire them to do whatever they want to do, and that they enjoy what they do, because I think enjoyment's really important in your job. And that through that, actually, people then respected me and realised actually she knows what she's talking about.
We had this conversation a few weeks ago about whether you have to be a better engineer as a woman. because there's plenty of mediocre male engineers out there. I'm sorry, it has to be said. And you get these comments. I don't know if you've ever had, she wasn't very good at her job. Well, I'm sorry, but John and Alan and Mike aren't very good at their job either, but nobody comments on that because they're part of the majority. But because we're more visible, perhaps we're expected to be exceptional. And actually being good is perfectly acceptable. There's plenty of good, steady engineers out there. Not everybody needs to be a blazing star who shines from the heavens. I don't know whether you've come across that.
Yes, and I think that there's also very different types of engineers. So actually, showing people that to become a director and it wasn't just about this standard route, and that the men mainly in the team were really happy to go out and do that. And I wasn't at that point in time, it wasn't what I was passionate about. So actually communicating that, and I found that people just didn't understand, and didn't just assume that was the route that they should go down, whereas showing them there's actually different routes. I didn't really feel like that I needed to prove myself. A lot of people say to me, because you're a woman, do you have to put more effort in? And maybe I did, maybe I don't, but I never actually saw any of that because it's what I wanted to do. And it's I do sometimes struggle with with some of the discussions that I had around women in engineering, because I think that whilst I know that there are lots of issues, and I know that we need more women in the industry, that personally, all I can do is be this passionate person and show them that I can do it just as well as anyone else, and I give that same opinion to the men, to the guys in my team, that if they're the best person for the role, the best person for a piece of work, then I don't really segregate them whether they're female or male, and I just want them to be passionate and want to work hard and do a really good job.
The ultimate aim is that nobody talks about women engineers and men engineers. They just talk about engineers, and it doesn't matter whether that person is male or female or non-binary or whatever they are. If they're the best person to do that job, then that's the job they should be doing. And I think that's the point at which you won't need podcasts like this, because ultimately everybody will just recognise the skill set rather than the gender.
Yeah, I agree.
That's the dream, isn't it? So I've got, I think, one final question for the podcast, which is a question that we ask all our guests, and it's, what would you like to see happening in the construction industry in the next 5 years?
So from a personal point of view, I want to see a change in how the consultants are procured on projects, that we move with the times, because we're doing exactly the same thing as we did 20 years ago. And so that my discipline is seen alongside the landscape as one discipline, and that is just as important as the architect or the structural engineer or the services engineer on those projects. And that's what I would love to see, because that's been my bugbear probably for at least the last 15 years whilst I've been doing this type of work.
And how do you think we can achieve that, I guess, equality for your discipline alongside everyone else?
So I'm hoping that my move to Land Studio, that actually that happens more and more, and the more we're promoting it, the more landscape architects actually that we're speaking to who go, that's a great idea. I think that if that starts to happen, then we can all force it to happen through. I don't think it's going to happen overnight. I think it's taken a long time to get to this point anyway. And promotion through we're promoting it to all of our clients, and they all seem to understand the reasons and think it's a great idea. We've just got to get them to make that step.
Yeah, we'll definitely check back. You can come back in a year and tell us that you've been successful. Well, it's been an absolute pleasure to meet such kindred spirit. I'd seen your CV, but I didn't realise quite how closely we were linked, and that is really cool. Thank you so much for joining us on the Engineering Rebuilt podcast. It's been a real pleasure to meet you, good luck with changing the universe.
Thank you for listening to this episode of Engineering Rebuilt. We hope you enjoyed being part of the conversation. Please join us next time to hear more diverse stories from people who are reclaiming their narrative to rebuild engineering.